Okay, so this happened a while ago, and it was the scariest night of my life. I decided to go camping alone in the Adirondack Mountains. I love nature, the whole peace and quiet thing. But man, I wish I hadn't gone alone. I set up my tent in this clearing deep in the forest. It was getting dark, and I started a fire, just chilling and roasting some marshmallows. Then I heard these twigs snapping nearby. I thought it was probably just an animal or something, but it felt too close for comfort. I brushed it off, thinking I was being paranoid. But then I heard it again, closer this time. I peeked around, but I didn't see anything. I mean, it was getting dark, and the woods can play tricks on your mind. I heard footsteps, and this feeling of unease settled in. I didn't see anyone, but it felt like someone was watching me. I tried to focus on the fire, but my heart was racing, and I couldn't shake this feeling of being watched. I zipped up my tent and tried to sleep, but I just couldn't. I felt on edge, like something was off. And then I heard it, someone whispering my name. It was so faint, like a whisper carried by the wind. I froze, my heart in my throat. I stayed quiet, listening. I heard footsteps circling my tent, slow and deliberate. I felt this cold dread creeping up on me. I mean, who else would be out there in the middle of nowhere, knowing my name? I knew I had to do something, so I grabbed a flashlight and unzipped the tent slowly. There, just beyond the trees, I saw a figure standing in the darkness. I couldn't see their face, but I knew they were watching me. I yelled out, asking who they were and what they wanted, but they didn't answer. I packed up my stuff in a hurry, trying not to make too much noise. But every time I looked up, that figure was still there, just standing and watching. I felt this terror rising inside me, this fear that made my hands shake. I decided to bolt, to get out of there as fast as I could. I ran through the woods, not even caring where I was going, just wanting to get away from that figure. It felt like they were chasing me, like they knew the woods better than I did. I stumbled and fell a couple of times, branches scratching me as I ran. I could hear footsteps behind me, and I didn't dare look back. I just kept running, gasping for air, my heart pounding in my chest. I tripped on a root and fell hard, my ankle twisting. I cried out in pain, trying to get up, but I couldn't. I felt this overwhelming sense of dread, knowing I was stuck there in the middle of nowhere, defenseless. I heard footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. I turned my flashlight toward the sound, and I saw the figure standing there, just a few feet away. I couldn't see their face, but I felt this terror like I'd never felt before. I begged them to leave me alone, to go away, but they just stood there, silent. I felt this icy fear taking over, knowing I was at their mercy. I tried to crawl away, but my ankle throbbed with pain, and I couldn't move fast enough. They reached out toward me, and I screamed, pleading for help. But then, suddenly, they stopped and turned away. I heard them walking off into the woods, disappearing into the darkness. I stayed there, shaking and crying, until I couldn't hear anything anymore. I didn't dare move until morning, terrified they might come back. When dawn broke, I managed to hobble my way back to my car. I drove straight to the nearest town and reported what happened to the authorities. They searched the area, but they didn't find anyone. It was like the figure vanished into thin air. That night in the woods, it felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I still get chills thinking about it, wondering who that person was and what they wanted from me. I haven't been camping alone since, and I doubt I ever will. I remember this night in the Great Smoky Mountains like it was yesterday, even though it was a while back. I was out camping and decided to explore an old lodge I stumbled upon. It was abandoned, the windows boarded up, and vines creeping up the walls. The door creaked open with a loud screech, and I stepped inside. It was dark, musty, like no one had been there for years. I had this weird feeling, like I wasn't alone, but I figured it was just my nerves acting up. I explored the place, trying to ignore the eerie feeling, but then I heard footsteps upstairs. I froze, listening. I mean, who would be here in this abandoned lodge? I thought maybe it was an animal or something, but it sounded like heavy footsteps, like boots on the wooden floor. I climbed the stairs cautiously, my heart pounding. The footsteps led to a room at the end of the hallway. I hesitated before knocking, but there was no answer. I pushed the door open slowly, and that's when I saw her. She was standing by the window, staring out into the darkness. I couldn't see her face, just a silhouette against the faint moonlight. I asked if she was okay, but she didn't respond. She just stood there, not moving an inch. I felt this uneasy feeling creeping up on me. I mean, who was she? What was she doing here in this abandoned place all alone? I asked her again if she needed help or something, but she stayed silent. I stepped closer, trying to get a better look, but she didn't acknowledge me. I swear, it felt like she wasn't even there, like she was a ghost or something. I felt this chill in the air, this sense of dread that I couldn't shake off. I decided to leave her alone and went back downstairs. But the whole time, I felt like someone was watching me, following me. I couldn't shake off this feeling of being unwelcome in that lodge. I set up my camp outside, trying to brush off the weird encounter. I made a fire, trying to distract myself, but I kept thinking about that woman in the lodge. I mean, why was she there? What was she doing? As the night went on, I heard noises coming from the lodge. Footsteps, faint whispers. I tried to ignore it, but it felt like they were getting closer, like someone was moving around inside. I decided to go back and check, thinking maybe she needed help or something. But when I got inside, the place was empty. I mean, completely deserted, no sign of anyone. It was eerie, like that woman had vanished into thin air. I felt this chill down my spine, this feeling of being watched. I tried to shrug it off and went back to my camp. But the noises didn't stop. It felt like someone was out there, lurking in the darkness. I couldn't sleep, now with this feeling of dread hanging over me. I kept thinking about that woman, about the noises, and I wished I hadn't gone into that lodge. I mean, who knows what was really going on there? I heard footsteps outside my tent, slow and deliberate. I peeked out, but I didn't see anyone. I felt this overwhelming fear, this sense of danger that I couldn't shake off. I mean, I was alone in the middle of nowhere, and it felt like someone was playing a game with me. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out of the tent, trying to see if anyone was there. But it was just silence, this eerie silence that made my skin crawl. I felt this urge to run, to get out of there, but I was frozen in place. Then, out of nowhere, I heard her voice. It was faint, distant, but it was her voice, whispering my name. I looked around, trying to find where it was coming from, but it felt like it was echoing from all directions. I felt this panic rising inside me, this feeling of being trapped. I didn't know what to do, where to go. It was like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I heard her voice again, closer this time. I turned around, and there she was, standing just a few feet away from me. Her eyes were empty, void of any emotion. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. She reached out toward me, and I stumbled backward, falling to the ground. I scrambled to get up, to run, but it felt like I was moving in slow motion. I felt this overwhelming sense of terror, this fear that I couldn't escape. I managed to get back on my feet and ran. I didn't look back, I just ran as fast as I could, trying to get away from that place. I didn't stop until I reached my car, and even then, I felt this dread lingering. I drove away, not daring to look back. I didn't stop until I reached a town, far away from that lodge. I reported what happened to the cops, but they found nothing when they searched the area. This one time, when I was camping at Lake Tahoe, something really creepy happened. I pitched my tent by the lake, just wanting to chill and enjoy nature. But then, as it got darker, I felt this weird feeling like someone was watching me. I looked around, but I didn't see anyone. I mean, it's a popular spot, so I figured it was just my imagination. I sat by the fire, roasting marshmallows, trying to shake off the feeling, but it lingered. Then, I noticed a figure standing at the edge of the trees, just watching. I couldn't make out much in the dark, but it was definitely a guy. He was just standing there, not moving, not saying anything. I felt this chill run down my spine, like I was being watched by a stranger. I tried to tell myself maybe he was lost or something, but I couldn't shake off this feeling of unease. I called out to him, asking if he needed help, but he didn't respond. He just kept staring. I mean, who does that? It was weird, like he was silently observing me. I tried to go back to my fire, but I couldn't relax. I felt his eyes on me the whole time, like he was watching my every move. I mean, it felt invasive, like he was encroaching on my space. I thought about packing up and leaving, but it was late, and I didn't want to navigate the woods in the dark. So, I decided to stay put, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched. I kept checking around, but he was still there, just standing and watching. I mean, what was he doing out there, staring at my campsite? I huddled up in my tent, feeling this overwhelming sense of discomfort. I couldn't sleep, not with this guy lurking around. I mean, I was alone, and it felt vulnerable, like I was at his mercy. I heard footsteps outside my tent, slow and deliberate. I peeked out, but it was too dark to see anything. I felt this panic rising inside me, like I was in danger. I called out, asking who was there, but there was no response. It felt like someone was toying with me, playing mind games. I heard whispers, faint and distant. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it felt eerie, like they were coming from all directions. I stayed quiet, trying to listen, trying to figure out where they were coming from. But then, suddenly, everything went silent. It was like the world paused, and I felt this deep sense of dread settle in. I heard footsteps walking away, fading into the distance. I stayed in my tent, scared to move, scared of what might happen if I stepped out. When dawn broke, I mustered up the courage to step out of my tent. There was no sign of that guy anywhere. I felt this mix of relief and unease, wondering what had just happened. I packed up my stuff as fast as I could, not wanting to stick around. But as I was leaving, I saw something in the dirt near my campsite. It was a message written with sticks. I see you. I felt this chill run down my spine, this fear that I couldn't shake off. Who was watching me? What did they want? I hurried out of there, not looking back. I had been looking forward to this camping trip for ages. Glacier National Park, Montana, stunning landscapes, serene nature, and a break from the hustle and bustle. But as the day faded into dusk and I settled into my campsite, something felt off. I noticed a man lingering at the edge of the forest, just beyond my campsite. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, almost like he was observing me. It was unsettling. At first, I tried to brush it off, thinking he might be another camper or a hiker taking in the scenery. But the way he stared, motionless, it sent shivers down my spine. As the night crept in, I tried to relax, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Every sound, every rustle of leaves, had me on edge. I couldn't shake this growing sense of unease. I thought maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, the isolation getting to me, but this gut feeling persisted. I huddled in my tent, zipping it up tight, feeling this inexplicable need for safety. The trees cast eerie shadows, and every now and then I catch glimpses of movement from the corner of my eye. Was it the man from earlier? Or just my imagination running wild in the dark? The night grew colder, the wind whispering through the trees, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I tried to reason with myself, telling myself it was just nerves, but I couldn't calm down. My heart raced at the slightest sound, the crunch of twigs or distant howls of coyotes. I woke up to the first light of dawn, bleary-eyed and exhausted. The man from yesterday wasn't there anymore, or at least I couldn't see him. But there was this lingering sense of dread, this paranoia that settled deep within me. I decided to take a hike, thinking the fresh air would ease my nerves. The trails were beautiful, but I couldn't enjoy them fully. I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling this constant weight of being observed. It felt like I was being followed, even though I couldn't see anyone. Back at the camp, the feeling persisted. I tried to busy myself, cook some food, read a book, anything to distract me. But the unease grew with the setting sun. It was like a dark cloud looming over me. As night fell again, I locked myself in the tent, feeling this overwhelming fear. Every rustle, every crackle outside felt like impending danger. I knew I had to sleep, but the fear kept me wide awake, my mind racing through all the possibilities. I must have dozed off eventually because I woke up to a sound, a soft rustling. My heart pounded. I peeked out of the tent, and there he was standing just at the edge of the campsite, barely visible in the dim moonlight. The same man from before, watching, lurking. My blood ran cold. I didn't know what to do. I was paralyzed with fear, stuck in this nightmarish situation. I couldn't call for help, couldn't confront him. I felt trapped, cornered. I stayed silent, watching him watching me. It felt like hours before he finally turned and disappeared into the woods. I didn't sleep after that. I packed up as soon as the sun started to rise, my hands trembling as I hurriedly dismantled my camp. I practically ran to my car, heart racing the whole way. I felt this immense relief when I finally left the park, but the fear lingered, this haunting feeling that he was still out there somewhere. I reported the incident to the park authorities, but without much to go on, there wasn't anything they could do. The drive back home was nerve-wracking, glancing in the rearview mirror every few seconds. Even when I got back, that feeling of being watched stuck with me. I couldn't shake the paranoia. It was like he had seeped into my mind, this lingering terror that never seemed to fade away. I was camping alone in Redwood National Park, just wanting to disconnect and enjoy the nature. I mean, it's a beautiful place with those towering trees and all. So, I was hiking around, exploring the trails when I stumbled upon this hidden clearing. It was kinda off the beaten path, covered in thick foliage. I felt this curiosity, this urge to see what was there. I pushed my way through the bushes and found this makeshift shelter. I mean, it was basic, made of branches and tarp, but it looked lived in. I thought maybe it belonged to another hiker, but something felt off about it. I poked around, checking out the place, and that's when I found this journal. It was filled with writings, ramblings, and sketches. It felt eerie, like I was invading someone's personal space. The writings were disturbing, talking about isolation, fears, and this growing paranoia. I mean, the words were jumbled, like the person was struggling with their thoughts. I started feeling this sense of unease, like I shouldn't be there, like I stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to see. But I couldn't shake off this feeling of curiosity, this need to understand what was going on. As it got darker, I decided to camp nearby. I mean, the sun was setting, and I didn't want to get lost in the woods. But that night, things got weird. I heard noises, rustling in the bushes around my campsite. It felt like someone was watching me, lurking in the shadows. I tried to brush it off, thinking it was just animals, but it felt different, more intentional. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't shake off this feeling of being observed. It was like someone was out there, playing mind games with me. I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming closer to my tent. I grabbed a flashlight, trying to see who or what was there, but the darkness was thick, like a curtain hiding whatever was lurking outside. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but there was no response. It felt like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I heard this voice, distant and low, whispering something that I couldn't make out. It sent shivers down my spine, this feeling of dread settling in. I stayed quiet, hoping whatever it was would go away. But the noises didn't stop. It felt like the night stretched on forever, this tense silence broken by occasional rustles and whispers. I couldn't take it anymore. I unzipped my tent and shone my flashlight around, but there was no one there. It was like the sounds disappeared as soon as I stepped out. I felt this fear creeping up on me, this feeling of being in danger. I mean, what if someone was out there, watching, waiting? I tried to stay alert, waiting for dawn to break. When morning finally came, I packed up my stuff, eager to get out of there. But as I was leaving, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, and there he was, the hermit from the clearing, standing a few feet away, just watching me. His eyes were empty, void of any emotion. I felt this chill run down my spine. I asked if he was okay, if he needed help, but he didn't respond. He just stood there, this eerie silence hanging between us. I tried to leave, but I felt his gaze following me, this feeling of being trailed by something unsettling. It was like he was watching me go, and it made me feel so uncomfortable. I reported what happened to the park rangers, telling them about the hermit's hideaway and the strange encounter. They went to check it out, but when they got there, the shelter was deserted, like the hermit had vanished. That night in Redwood National Park, it felt like I stumbled upon something that I shouldn't have. That hermit and his hideaway, it's like a scene from a nightmare that I can't forget. I still wonder what was going on in that place, what secrets it held. It was a camping trip to Bryce Canyon National Park with my boyfriend. We were excited, to explore the trails and watch the sunrise over those stunning rock formations. But things took a dark turn that night. We set up our tent in this secluded spot in the canyon, just the two of us. It was peaceful, the stars shining bright in the sky. We were sitting by the fire, roasting marshmallows, when we heard footsteps approaching our campsite. I looked around, expecting maybe it was a ranger or another camper, but it wasn't. It was this guy, a stranger, standing there, just staring at us. I mean, it was weird, unexpected. He didn't say anything, didn't introduce himself. He just stood there, this eerie silence hanging between us. I felt this unease creeping up on me, like something wasn't right. I asked him if he needed anything, trying to be polite, but he just kept staring. It made me uncomfortable, like he was sizing us up or something. My boyfriend tried to defuse the situation, asking if he was lost or needed directions, but the guy just ignored him. I mean, it was so strange, his intense gaze fixed on us. I felt this knot in my stomach, this instinctual fear that I couldn't shake off. I mean, we were alone, and this guy's presence felt so intrusive, so unsettling. We tried to carry on, hoping he'd leave, but he stayed. It felt like he was encroaching on our space, on our peaceful camping trip. As the night went on, things got weirder. We heard noises around our campsite, rustling in the bushes, footsteps approaching and retreating. It felt deliberate, intentional. I peeked out of the tent, trying to see who or what was out there, but it was pitch black, like someone or something was hiding in the shadows. I felt this chill run down my spine, this fear of the unknown. I mean, we were on edge, feeling this growing sense of dread. We thought about leaving, but it was too late, and the darkness made the trail dangerous to navigate. At some point, my boyfriend stepped out to check things out, and that's when things got worse. He came back in a panic, saying the guy was still there, just standing and watching us from a distance. I felt this wave of fear wash over me, this feeling of being vulnerable, like prey being hunted. I mean, why was he still there, silently observing us? We decided to stay inside the tent, locking it up, hoping he'd eventually leave. But then we heard him, his voice echoing through the canyon, saying something sinister, something that made my blood run cold. I couldn't make out the words exactly, but it was threatening, menacing. It felt like a warning, like he was toying with us. We called out, asking him to leave, but he just laughed, this chilling laugh that echoed in the canyon. I mean, it sent shivers down my spine, this feeling of impending danger. I felt this panic rising inside me, this need to get out of there. But we were trapped, surrounded by darkness, by this stranger who seemed intent on terrorizing us. We tried to wait it out, hoping for dawn to break, but it felt like the night stretched on forever. The noises didn't stop, this feeling of being watched persisted, and I couldn't shake off this fear that he'd come closer. I mean, it was like a nightmare unfolding, this relentless terror that we couldn't escape. We thought about screaming for help, but it felt like the canyon swallowed our voices. At some point, we heard footsteps approaching the tent, slow and deliberate. My heart raced, my breath caught in my throat, as the zipper of our tent started moving. I felt this overwhelming terror, this feeling of being defenseless, as the zipper slid open. But it wasn't the stranger. It was a ranger, responding to a call from another camper who heard our commotion. The ranger scared the guy off, and when we stepped out, the stranger was gone, vanished into the night. The ranger escorted us to safety, and we reported what happened to the police. I was on this camping trip to the Everglades National Park, looking forward to a bit of nature and solitude. I mean, it's a beautiful place with all those marshes and wildlife. I found this spot near the marshes, thinking it'd be a great place to set up camp. The sun was setting, casting this golden hue over everything. It was peaceful, you know? Just the sounds of birds and the rustling of leaves. But then, things started getting strange. I saw this woman wandering near the edge of the marshes. She looked like a naturalist, you know, with the binoculars and gear. I thought maybe she was studying the wildlife or something. I nodded and said hi as she passed, but she didn't respond. It was like she didn't even notice me. I mean, it was a little odd, but I shrugged it off, thinking maybe she was lost in her own thoughts. As night fell, I heard noises coming from the marshes. I mean, I've camped before and heard animals, but this was different. It felt unsettling, like something wasn't right. I tried to sleep, but those noises persisted. It felt like whispers in the distance, voices I couldn't quite make out. It made me feel on edge, like I wasn't alone out there. At some point, I stepped out of my tent to check things out. I mean, curiosity got the better of me. But the moment I stepped out, I felt this chill run down my spine. It was so dark, and I couldn't see much beyond the glow of my flashlight. I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the direction of the marshes. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but there was no response. It felt like the night itself was watching me, like I was being observed. I mean, it was creepy, this feeling of being in a place that suddenly didn't feel safe anymore. I hurried back into my tent, trying to shake off this fear. But then, I heard someone whispering outside my tent. It was a woman's voice, saying something in this low, hushed tone. I couldn't understand the words, but it sent shivers down my spine. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was probably just my mind playing tricks on me. But the whispers continued, growing louder, more persistent. I mustered up the courage to peek outside, and that's when I saw her again, the woman from earlier, standing at the edge of the marshes. She was just staring at me, this haunting gaze fixed on my tent. I called out, asking if she needed help or if something was wrong, but she didn't respond. She just kept staring, this eerie silence hanging between us. I felt this overwhelming fear, this sense of danger that I couldn't shake off. I mean, it felt like she wasn't there for innocent reasons, like there was something off about her. I decided to pack up and leave, not wanting to stay another minute in that place. But as I was packing, I heard her footsteps approaching my tent. I mean, it was like she was getting closer, like she was coming for me. I panicked, grabbed my stuff, and ran. I didn't look back, just ran as fast as I could, trying to get away from that spot, from her. I made it to my car and drove away, not stopping until I reached the nearest town. I reported what happened to the park rangers, but they didn't find anyone matching her description when they checked the area. We were camping in Rocky Mountain National Park, my girlfriend and I, looking forward to some time in the great outdoors. It was beautiful, you know, with those majestic peaks and the crisp mountain air. We found this spot by a stream, thinking it'd be perfect for our campsite. But as the sun set, things started feeling off. I mean, it got colder, and this strange unease settled in the air. I noticed this figure standing at a distance, a man. He seemed out of place, just watching us. I thought maybe he was another camper, but something about him felt wrong. I tried to shake off the feeling, thinking maybe I was just being paranoid. But then, as night fell, things got weirder. I mean, we heard noises, rustling in the bushes around our campsite. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but there was no response. It felt like someone was out there, lurking in the shadows, just watching. My girlfriend and I tried to ignore it, you know, telling ourselves it was probably an animal or something. But then, we heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, getting closer to our tent. I felt this fear creeping up on me, this sense of being watched, and I could see it in my girlfriend's eyes too. I mean, it was unsettling, this feeling of being stalked in the wilderness. We heard this voice, distant and low, whispering something that I couldn't quite make out. It made my skin crawl, this feeling of dread sinking in deeper. I mean, We didn't know what to do. We were alone out there, with this mysterious figure playing mind games with us. We tried to sleep, but we couldn't shake off this feeling of being followed. Every rustle, every distant sound, it felt like he was getting closer, like he was playing this sick game with us. At some point, my girlfriend stepped out to check things out, and when she came back, she was white as a sheet. She said she saw the guy, standing not too far from our tent, just watching us. I felt this panic rising inside me, this fear that we were in danger. I mean, why was he following us? What did he want? We decided to pack up and leave, not wanting to stick around for whatever might happen next. But as we were packing, I saw him, this figure standing at the edge of the clearing, watching us with this chilling stare. I called out, asking what he wanted, but he just stood there, silent. It was like he was enjoying our fear, reveling in our discomfort. I mean, we hurried, throwing our stuff into the car, not looking back. I felt this overwhelming relief when we finally drove away, leaving that spot behind. We reported what happened to the park rangers, but they didn't find anyone matching his description when they checked the area. It was like he vanished into thin air. That night in Rocky Mountain National Park, it felt like we were being hunted. That guy and his relentless pursuit, it's like a nightmare that I can't shake off. I mean, we just wanted to enjoy nature, and it turned into this night of terror that I never want to experience again. So, me and my buddies, we decided to go camping in Big Sur, for a little getaway. It was supposed to be fun, chilling by the coast, enjoying the views. We found this spot near the cliffs, thinking it'd be cool to camp close to the ocean. But as the day turned to dusk, things started feeling kinda weird. I mean, the air got chilly, and this eerie vibe settled in. We noticed this woman, this lone figure, hanging around the cliffs. She looked, I don't know, out of place. I mean, what was she doing out there all alone? She seemed fixated on something, staring out at the ocean, lost in her own world. We thought maybe she was just enjoying the view, but something about her made us uneasy. As night fell, things got creepier. I mean, we heard whispers carried by the wind, faint and distant. It was like the cliffs were murmuring secrets, sending chills down our spines. We tried to brush it off, telling ourselves it was probably the wind, playing tricks on us. But then, we heard footsteps around our campsite, slow and deliberate. It felt intentional, like someone was watching us. I tried to see who it was, shining my flashlight around, but it was too dark. I felt this fear building up, this feeling of being observed by someone we couldn't see. At some point, one of my buddies said he saw the woman standing near the edge of the cliffs, just watching us. I mean, it felt so wrong, her silently staring at us from a distance. We called out, asking if she needed help or if she was lost, but she didn't respond. It was like she didn't hear us or didn't want to answer. I felt this unease growing inside me, this sense that something wasn't right about her. I mean, why was she hanging around our campsite at night? We decided to huddle up in our tents, trying to ignore the eerie feeling. But then, we heard her voice, distant and haunting, saying something that I couldn't quite make out. It sent shivers down my spine, this feeling of dread sinking in. We tried to sleep, but those whispers kept echoing in the night, like a haunting melody. It was unsettling, this feeling of being surrounded by something we couldn't understand. At some point, I peeked out of my tent, and I saw her, standing near the cliffs, this haunting silhouette against the moonlight. I mean, it felt like she was staring right at me, and I hurried back inside, heart racing. I whispered to my buddies, telling them she was still there, just watching us. We were all scared, not knowing what she was up to, what she wanted. We heard footsteps approaching our tents, slow and deliberate. I felt this terror rising inside me, this fear of the unknown. I called out, asking who was there, but there was no response. It was like the night itself swallowed our voices. I mean, it was so dark, so silent, and that's when we heard her whispers right outside our tents. I couldn't understand the words, but it felt menacing, like a warning. We decided to leave, packing up our stuff as fast as we could. But as we were leaving, we saw her again, standing on the cliffs, just watching us drive away. We planned this camping trip in Sequoia National Park, my friends and I, wanting to experience the beauty of those ancient trees. I mean, it was supposed to be a fun getaway, right? We found a spot surrounded by those massive sequoias, thinking it'd be perfect for our campsite. But as the sun started to set, things started feeling kinda strange. The woods got darker, the air heavier. Then we noticed the sky, lurking nearby. He looked out of place, you know? I mean, what was he doing there all alone? He was watching us, just standing at a distance, this unsettling gaze fixed on our campsite. It made us uncomfortable, this feeling of being observed. We tried to ignore him, telling ourselves maybe he was just a hiker passing through. But then, as night fell, things took a turn for the worse. We heard footsteps, rustling in the bushes around our campsite. It felt like someone was creeping closer, intentionally hiding in the shadows. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but there was no response. It felt like the woods swallowed our voices, like we were being watched by someone hiding in the darkness. My friends and I, we huddled up in our tents, trying to calm each other down. But then, we heard this voice, distant and chilling, saying something that I couldn't quite make out. It was like a warning, echoing through the trees. We felt this fear settling in, this sense of danger lurking outside our tents. I mean, why was this guy playing games with us? At some point, I peeked outside, and I saw him, standing near our campsite. It was so dark, but I could see his silhouette against the moonlight. He was watching us, this sinister presence that sent shivers down my spine. I whispered to my friends, telling them he was there, just standing and staring at us. We were all scared, not knowing what he was planning, what his intentions were. We heard him moving around, getting closer to our tents. I mean, my heart raced, and I could feel this terror gripping me, this fear of the unknown. I called out, asking what he wanted, but he didn't respond. It was like he was toying with us, enjoying our fear. I mean, it was so surreal, this feeling of being hunted in the woods. We decided to leave, packing up our stuff as quietly as we could. But then, as we were leaving, we saw him again, following us through the trees. He was persistent, not giving up, and that's when we ran, sprinting through the ancient groves, hoping to escape. I mean, it was pitch black, and we were running blindly, just wanting to get away from him. We could hear his footsteps behind us, this relentless pursuit that fueled our terror. We didn't know where we were going, just running, trying to find a way out. The trees loomed over us, casting eerie shadows, and I felt this overwhelming fear, this dread of what might happen if he caught up. We heard him getting closer, his breath heavy behind us. I mean, we were terrified, not knowing if we'd make it out of those woods alive. But then, we stumbled upon a ranger station, and we ran inside, panting and scared out of our minds. We told the rangers what happened, but when they went to check, the guy was gone. That night in Sequoia National Park, it felt like we encountered something out of a nightmare. I decided to go camping in Denali National Park in Alaska, to disconnect and enjoy the wilderness. It's a vast and stunning place, perfect for an adventure. I found this spot, a little isolated but surrounded by nature's beauty. It was peaceful, with the sounds of the wind brushing against the trees and the distant calls of wildlife. But then, I noticed this guy. He looked like a survivalist, rugged and equipped with gear that seemed more serious than what I had. I thought maybe he was just exploring the area like me, embracing the wild. He nodded as I passed by, but there was something off about his gaze, this intense stare that lingered too long. It made me uncomfortable, but I brushed it off, thinking maybe he was just focused on something else. As night fell, things started feeling weird. I heard noises, rustling in the bushes nearby. It's not unusual in the wild, but this felt different, deliberate. I tried to sleep, but those noises continued. It was like someone was moving around my campsite, cautious not to be seen. I felt this growing unease, this feeling that I wasn't alone out there. At some point, I saw a shadow passing by, quick and silent. I thought maybe it was an animal, but it felt off. It was unnerving, this feeling of being watched. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but there was no response. It felt like the night was holding its breath, like whatever or whoever was out there was playing a game with me. I tried to brush it off, but then I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling around my tent. It sent chills down my spine, this feeling of someone encroaching on my space. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out, trying to see who it was, but it was too dark. I felt this tension in the air, this sense of danger lurking around me. I called out again, more forcefully this time, demanding to know who was there. And that's when I saw him, the survivalist guy, standing just beyond the reach of my light. He didn't say anything, just stared at me with this intense, unsettling gaze. I felt this knot in my stomach, this fear building up inside me. I asked him what he wanted, why he was lurking around my campsite, but he didn't respond. It was like he was sizing me up, studying me with this cold, calculating look. It was so eerie, his silent presence there in the darkness. I tried to maintain composure, but deep down, I was scared. I retreated into my tent, heart racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. Why was this guy behaving like that? What did he want from me? I heard him whispering something, words that I couldn't quite make out. It was menacing, chilling. It made me feel trapped, vulnerable. I wanted to leave, to get out of there, but it was late and the wilderness was unforgiving at night. I felt this suffocating fear, this sense of being in danger. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't shake off this feeling of being watched. Every little sound outside made me jump, made my heart race. As dawn broke, I packed up my stuff, wanting to leave as soon as possible. I didn't want to stay another minute in that place with that guy lurking around. We were a group of buddies, excited for a hiking trip in Canyonlands National Park. The vast canyons and stunning landscapes had us thrilled, ready for an adventure. We found this spot for our campsite, surrounded by the rugged beauty of the park. The sun was setting, casting this golden hue over everything. It was serene, just the sounds of nature all around us. But then, things took a turn. We saw this guy, this lone wanderer, walking through the canyons. He looked rugged, like he'd been out there for days. I thought maybe he was another hiker, exploring the area like us. But there was something about him that felt off. His eyes were distant, like he was lost in his own world. It made me uneasy, this feeling that something wasn't quite right. As night fell, we heard noises, echoes bouncing off the canyon walls. I mean, it felt like the canyons were whispering secrets, sending shivers down our spines. We tried to set up camp, but those whispers continued, distant and haunting. I mean, it was weird, this feeling that the canyons were alive, almost conspiring against us. I brushed it off, thinking it was just the wind playing tricks, you know? But then, weird things started happening. Our gear went missing. Things we placed neatly were scattered around the campsite. I mean, we joked about it at first, blaming each other. But then, it got worse. We heard footsteps around our tents, slow and deliberate, but when we looked, there was no one there. I felt this unease growing inside me, this feeling of being watched. I mean, who or what was out there messing with us? At some point, one of my buddies said he saw the wanderer guy, standing at a distance, just watching us. I mean, it was unsettling, this feeling of being observed without any explanation. We called out, asking if he needed help or if he was messing with us, but he didn't respond. It was like he was this silent presence, this ominous figure haunting our campsite. I tried to sleep, but those whispers continued, growing louder, almost like chanting. I mean, it was so eerie, this feeling of something unnatural in the air. I peeked out of my tent, and that's when I saw him, the wanderer guy, standing at the edge of the canyon. I mean, it felt like he was staring right at me, this intense gaze that sent chills down my spine. I whispered to my friends, telling them he was there, just watching us. We were all scared, not knowing what he was up to, what he wanted. Then, things got worse. We heard rocks falling from the canyon walls, not big ones, but enough to make us jump. It was like the canyon was closing in on us. I mean, we felt trapped, surrounded by this strange presence that we couldn't explain. We wanted to leave, to get out of there, but it was late, and the trails were treacherous at night. At some point, our campfire went out, just like that, without any wind. I mean, it was unsettling, this sudden darkness engulfing us. I tried to relight it, but it wouldn't catch. And then, we heard this laughter, this chilling laughter echoing through the canyons. I mean, it felt malevolent, this feeling of being toyed with. We huddled up, trying to stay together, but then our tents started shaking, as if someone was pushing against them. I mean, we were terrified, not knowing what to do. I felt this overwhelming fear, this sense that we were in danger. I mean, why was this happening to us? What did that wanderer guy have to do with all of this? We decided to leave, packing up in a hurry, not caring about the trails or the darkness. I mean, we just wanted to get out of there, away from whatever was haunting us. So, me and my buddies were hiking along the Appalachian Trail, just taking in the nature, you know? It was a beautiful day, the sun shining through the trees, birds chirping. We were having a good time, cracking jokes and making plans for the hike. Then, out of nowhere, we saw this lone female trekker coming our way. She seemed off, like she was lost in her own world. I mean, nothing strange, just a bit distant. We nodded and said hi as she passed, but she didn't even acknowledge us. It was like she was in a trance, walking without noticing anyone around her. We shrugged it off and kept hiking. But then things started getting weird. We'd hear branches snapping behind us, like someone was following, but when we turned around, there was no one there. It was eerie, this feeling of being watched. We saw the same woman again, standing off the trail, just staring into the woods. We called out, asking if she was okay, but she didn't respond. It was like she was lost in another world. As we kept hiking, strange things started happening. We'd find our gear moved around when we'd stop to rest. Our maps went missing, only to turn up a little later in places we were sure we hadn't left them. At night, we'd hear whispers in the woods, voices that sounded distant and strange. It was unsettling, like the forest was trying to tell us something. We started getting on edge, feeling this tension in the air. I mean, we were a group of guys, but this whole thing made us uneasy. It felt like there was something dark lurking around us. One night, we set up camp, and I saw her again, standing at the edge of our campsite, just staring at us. I called out, asking her what she wanted, but she just turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. The next morning, things got even weirder. Our food was gone, all of it, like someone had raided our supplies while we slept. We looked around, but there were no signs of anyone else being there. We started feeling paranoid, like someone was messing with us. But then, I saw her again, standing off the trail, watching us with this cold stare. It sent shivers down my spine. We decided to move on, thinking maybe it was just a series of weird coincidences. But as we hiked, the atmosphere grew heavier, this feeling of impending doom hanging over us. At some point, one of my buddies twisted his ankle. We were helping him, trying to figure out what to do, when we saw her again, standing on the trail ahead, just staring at us. It felt like she was following us, like she was the cause of all the strange things happening. We tried to approach her, to ask if she needed help or if she knew what was going on, but as we got closer, she vanished into thin air. It was like she was never there. That's when we realized something was seriously wrong. We felt this fear gnawing at us, this feeling of being in danger. It was like the trail itself was warning us, telling us to get out. We hiked faster, trying to put distance between us and whatever was going on. But then, at one point, the trail split into two, and we had this gut feeling that something terrible was waiting for us down one of those paths. We hesitated, not knowing what to do, when we heard her voice, distant and cold, saying, "Choose wisely." It was bone-chilling, like a warning from beyond. We took a path, hoping it was the right one, but the further we went, the more wrong things felt. It was like we were walking into a nightmare, the forest growing darker and denser around us. We heard her whispers again, this time closer, almost surrounding us. It was like a chorus of voices, all saying the same eerie things. I mean, I couldn't understand the words, but it felt ominous. That's when we saw her, standing at the end of the trail, this time with this haunting smile on her face. We felt this terror consuming us, this dread that we'd walked right into something sinister. We turned around, ran back, not caring which path we took, just wanting to get out. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town, and even then, we felt like something was following us. We reported what happened to the local police, but they didn't find anything when they went to check the trail. It was like whatever was out there vanished without a trace. I had this dream of camping out in the desert under a vast blanket of stars. It seemed like the perfect getaway from the chaos of everyday life. The scenery was breathtaking, but the isolation was unnerving. Miles of desert stretched out around me, creating this eerie emptiness that made me feel small, insignificant. The first night was peaceful. The stars painted the sky, and the silence was almost overwhelming. But as I settled into my sleeping bag, a chill ran down my spine. It felt like someone was watching me. I glanced around, but the desert was empty. I tried to brush it off as my imagination. As the days passed, that feeling of being watched didn't fade. I couldn't shake it, no matter how hard I tried. It was like this shadow hanging over me, this sense of unease that never went away. I'd be hiking during the day, admiring the stark beauty of the desert, and then I'd catch glimpses of a figure in the distance, always far enough that I couldn't make out any details. It was like someone was following me, always just out of reach. At night, I'd see a silhouette against the moonlit dunes, this malevolent shadow lingering in the periphery. I'd catch movements from the corner of my eye, but whenever I turned to look, there was nothing there. The desert played tricks on my mind, or so I told myself. I couldn't sleep. Every rustle of the wind or distant sound had me on edge. It felt like I was being watched, stalked by something I couldn't see clearly. I'd lie in my tent, heart racing, waiting for the sunrise. One night, I woke up to a soft whispering sound. It was almost imperceptible, but it was there. I held my breath, straining to listen. And then I saw it, the figure, a dark silhouette, looming just outside my tent. My heart hammered in my chest, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't my imagination. Someone was there. I didn't dare move, didn't dare make a sound. The shadowy figure lingered for what felt like an eternity before vanishing into the desert darkness. I spent the rest of that night huddled in my sleeping bag, my mind racing with fear and questions. The following day, I packed up my camp and tried to leave, but the figure seemed to follow me. I'd see it standing on the horizon, a distant outline against the vast expanse of sand. No matter how far I traveled, it was there, a constant presence, a menacing shadow. I began to doubt my own sanity. Was this real? Was I hallucinating? But each time I spotted that figure, that question turned into a chilling certainty. It was as if the desert itself was alive, playing tricks on me, feeding off my fear. My food ran low, my water even lower. The figure seemed to be guiding me, leading me further into the desolate landscape. I couldn't find my way out. The dunes and valleys all seemed the same, a maze of shifting sands. I'd see it at every turn, every rise, every dip in the landscape. It didn't move like a person. It was more like a wisp of darkness, skirting the edge of my vision, always present but never tangible. Days stretched into nights, and I felt myself losing grip on reality. The fear was consuming me, turning my thoughts into a maze of paranoia. I'd see faces in the sand, hear whispers in the wind, tricks of my exhausted mind or something more sinister. I wanted to scream, to run, but there was nowhere to go. The desert was endless, and I was trapped in this waking nightmare. The figure, it felt like it was toying with me, leading me deeper into this barren labyrinth. I don't know how long I wandered, days blurring into nights. The figure, it was always there, this oppressive presence that never left. I felt like I was going mad, like the desert itself was closing in on me, suffocating me. And then, one day, I woke up, and it was gone. The figure, the shadowy stalker that haunted my every step, vanished without a trace. I stumbled out of the desert, weak, dehydrated, but alive. I don't know what that figure was, whether it was a trick of the desert or something else entirely. But the memory of those days in the desert, of feeling hunted by that shadowy figure, it's etched into my mind like a nightmare I can't escape. I was so stoked for this camping trip with my buddies. We had this whole thing planned out, pitching tents, chilling by the fire, just enjoying the great outdoors. Little did we know, things would take a turn that none of us expected. The Channel Islands National Park was this rugged, wild place, serene but kind of eerie, too. We settled into our campsite, cracking jokes, setting up the tents, just soaking in the beauty of the landscape. But as the day wore on, something felt off. It was this sense of being watched, this unnerving feeling that lingered around us. Nightfall brought with it a strange stillness. We gathered around the fire, swapping stories, but that feeling of being watched didn't fade. We laughed it off, attributing it to the wilderness playing tricks on our minds. As we turned in for the night, that sense of unease grew stronger. I heard rustling outside my tent, whispers carried by the wind, things that could have been my imagination, but they felt too real. We brushed it off, thinking it was just some nocturnal critters scavenging around. The next day, we decided to explore deeper into the park. But the further we ventured, the more uncomfortable things became. We'd stumble upon these makeshift signs, branches tied together, marking our trail. It felt like someone was leading us, guiding our path. But who? As night fell again, that sense of being watched intensified. We'd catch glimpses of figures darting behind trees, shadows in the periphery. We joked about it, but deep down, we were all on edge. Our campsite felt like a stage, and we were the reluctant actors in some sinister play. The sounds of the night, branches snapping, whispers carried by the breeze, began to unnerve us. We huddled close to the fire, trying to shake off this growing dread. Then, the forest fell silent. No chirping crickets, no rustling leaves. Just an eerie, oppressive quiet. And that's when it happened. We saw figures emerging from the darkness, locals, it seemed. But they weren't welcoming. They wore these grim expressions, eyes that seemed to pierce through the night. They circled us, muttering things under their breath, and we knew this wasn't some harmless prank. They wanted us gone, and they were making sure we got the message. We tried reasoning, attempted to explain that we meant no harm, that we were just here to camp. But they wouldn't listen. Their voices grew louder, harsher. It was like we had stumbled into their territory, and now they were marking us as intruders. We decided to pack up and leave, but they blocked our path. It was like a game of cat and mouse, us trying to sneak away, and them always a step ahead. We didn't want trouble, we just wanted out. Every step felt like we were walking into a trap. The locals were relentless, hurting us, driving us deeper into the woods. Panic set in, and we were running on pure adrenaline, fearing for our safety. We tried to call for help, but there was no signal. We were alone, lost in this wilderness with these hostile strangers. It felt like a nightmare, the fear, the uncertainty, the desperate need to escape. Hours felt like days. We stumbled through the dark, trying to find our way back to safety. But the locals, they were persistent, shadowing our every move. We were in their territory, and they made sure we knew it. Exhausted and scared, we eventually stumbled upon a ranger station. The relief was palpable. We thought we were safe. But even there, we couldn't shake the feeling that those locals were still out there, watching, waiting. We reported what had happened, but there was no evidence, no sign of those who chased us. The ranger assured us they'd look into it, but the unease lingered. We left the park, shaken and rattled, but grateful to be out. The whole experience felt surreal, like something out of a horror movie. We'd gone camping for an adventure, but what we got was a chilling encounter with the locals, turning our getaway into a terrifying ordeal we'd never forget. I had this thing about camping, the isolation, the quiet, the stars, you name it. So, I headed to the Black Hills National Forest in South Dakota, set on this perfect, serene getaway. The place was breathtakingly beautiful, but once the sun went down, that's when things took a turn. It was just me, my tent, and the forest. As night descended, a sense of unease settled in. The rustling of the leaves seemed louder, the darkness deeper. But I brushed it off, attributing it to the isolation and the unfamiliarity of the surroundings. I lit up my fire, trying to shake off the growing sense of discomfort. But something felt off, like the forest was holding its breath. Every sound had me on edge, the snapping twigs, the distant hooting of an owl, it all felt amplified. Then, in the midst of the darkness, I caught a glimpse of something moving between the trees. At first, I thought it was my imagination, just shadows dancing in the firelight. But the feeling lingered. I retired to my tent, hoping sleep would make it all seem less eerie. But sleep didn't come easy that night. It felt like I was being watched, this invisible presence lingering around the campsite. It was chilling. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps, soft but unmistakable, drawing closer to my tent. My heart raced. I was alone in the middle of nowhere, and someone was creeping around my campsite. I whispered to myself, hoping it was just an animal or a lost hiker. But then, I heard it, a low voice muttering something inaudible, just beyond my tent. Fear clutched at my throat, and I held my breath, trying to make out what was happening outside. Suddenly, the fabric of my tent was pressed in, as if someone was leaning against it. I couldn't see a thing. The darkness was suffocating. I could barely bring myself to breathe. Was it a lost soul looking for directions, or someone with a far more sinister intent? My mind raced through scenarios, and I reached for my phone, ready to dial for help. But the battery was dead, of course. I cursed myself for not charging it, feeling utterly helpless. The footsteps retreated, and for a moment, I thought it was over. But then, I heard whispers, a conversation just outside my tent. The voices were hushed, but they sounded male. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unsettling. I stayed frozen, holding my breath, waiting for them to leave. Minutes felt like hours. I could feel the tension in the air, this looming sense of danger just outside the thin layer of fabric that separated me from whatever lurked in the darkness. Eventually, the whispers faded, replaced by silence. I waited for what felt like an eternity, hoping it was safe to peek outside. But fear held me captive. I couldn't bring myself to move. As the first light of dawn crept into the tent, I summoned the courage to check outside. I unzipped the flaps slowly, expecting the worst. But there was nothing, just the forest, the quiet rustle of leaves, and the fading night. I packed up in a frenzy, abandoning the campsite in a hurry. Every sound made me jump, every movement in the trees set my heart racing. I didn't look back, not until I was miles away. I reported it to the park rangers, but without concrete evidence, it felt futile. They promised to keep an eye on the area, but I knew that my encounter in those darkened hills would haunt me for a long time. That night, that unseen intruder lurking in the shadows, it was something I never wanted to experience again. I set off on a hike in Olympic National Park, looking forward to exploring the dense rainforest and losing myself in its beauty. The tranquility of the woods was enchanting, with the scent of pine and damp earth filling the air. But as the day wore on, I noticed someone, a figure dressed as a park ranger. At first, I thought nothing of it. Rangers often patrol the trails. But this ranger, it was odd. They were always nearby, watching, observing, but never quite in plain sight. It unnerved me, this sense of being watched in the vast wilderness. As I trekked deeper into the forest, that feeling of being followed persisted. I tried to shake it off, attributing it to the isolation and the eeriness of the woods. But it was hard to ignore, this unsettling sensation. The rain started, turning the forest into this murky, fog-laden maze. The canopy offered little relief. The rain seeped through the leaves, soaking everything. The daylight faded fast, and I realized I had to find shelter. As I searched for a suitable place to set up camp, I felt the presence of that ranger always there, lurking somewhere beyond my line of sight. It was unnerving, but I tried to convince myself it was just a hyper-awareness born of solitude. I found a spot, set up my tent, and tried to shake off the unease. But then, in the distance, I saw the ranger figure, just standing there amidst the trees. It was getting dark, and the image of that figure against the fading light, it sent shivers down my spine. I crawled into my tent, trying to keep calm. But every rustle of the leaves, every snap of a twig outside made my heart race. It felt like the woods were closing in on me. Then came the sound of footsteps, a deliberate, heavy tread. I lay frozen, straining to hear over the pounding of my heart. The footsteps drew closer, stopping just outside my tent. I held my breath, praying it would go away. But the tent flap was pulled open abruptly, and there stood the ranger, drenched from the rain, his face obscured by the darkness. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by fear. He said nothing, just stared at me with this intense, penetrating gaze. It felt like an eternity before he finally spoke. His voice was low, menacing, and he demanded that I leave the park immediately. His words were harsh and disjointed, making no sense. I tried to reason with him, but he wouldn't listen. Instead, he insisted, more fervently this time, that I vacate the area. It was bizarre, his behavior erratic and threatening. I didn't argue. I packed up as fast as I could, not daring to glance back. I stumbled through the darkness, the rain pounding down, and the feeling of being pursued never left me. It was as if he was right there, right behind me, his presence looming over me. I reached my car, panting, drenched, and terrified. I drove away, feeling his eyes burning into my back until I was out of the park. I reported the incident to the authorities, but they found nothing, no trace of that menacing ranger figure. It haunted me, the relentless pursuit through the rainforest, the inexplicable behavior, and the fear that consumed me that night. It made me question the safety of those woods, leaving me with a lingering feeling that refused to fade. I've been itching for a solo camping trip for ages, and White Mountain National Forest seemed like the perfect escape. The dense woods, the serene mountains, I craved that kind of solitude. So, I packed my gear, ready for an adventure. The first day was blissful. The air was crisp, the scenery breathtaking. But as the day wound down, I felt a sense of being watched. I brushed it off. Camping alone can make you a bit jumpy, right? But that feeling lingered. The night was restless. Every rustle, every crackle of twigs had me on edge. But it wasn't until the second day that things got unnerving. I was hiking when I noticed a man, a complete stranger, far behind me, but always there, always in sight. I tried to ignore it, hoping it was mere coincidence, but my unease grew. I quickened my pace, changing trails, but he was always trailing, never closer, never farther. By the third day, his presence was suffocating. I'd catch glimpses of him among the trees, never saying a word, never making a move. He was just there. I decided to confront him, to ask what he wanted, but he always managed to slip away before I got close enough. It was eerie, this silent game of cat and mouse. As the days passed, his presence became more imposing. He was everywhere, lurking, a mere shadow in the dense forest. Panic set in. I was alone, and this stranger's pursuit had me on edge. I packed up to leave, my heart racing. I didn't feel safe anymore. But even as I left, he followed. His distant figure was etched against the horizon, always maintaining that ominous distance. I sped up, trying to shake him off, but it felt like he was drawing closer. It was as if he was controlling the space between us, orchestrating this torment. At night, when I thought I was safe in my tent, I heard sounds of crunching leaves, snapping twigs. I lay there, trembling, hoping it was just my imagination. But the feeling of being hunted, there was no shaking it off. I tried contacting the park authorities, but there was no cell service. Panic surged within me. I was stranded with this relentless pursuer. I spent sleepless nights, my mind consumed with thoughts of escape, thoughts of survival. It felt like a nightmare. I couldn't comprehend what this stranger wanted from me, why he was tormenting me. I navigated my way back to civilization, constantly looking over my shoulder. But even as I reached the outskirts of the forest, I felt his presence, that feeling of being hunted never fading. I was thrilled about this camping trip to Great Basin National Park, a break from the city grind. Our group, a bunch of college friends, had planned this for months. The fresh air, the stunning scenery, it was our getaway. But one night, things took a turn for the worse. We set up camp, laughed, roasted marshmallows, all the usual camping fun. But there was an odd vibe among us, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Then, someone noticed it, a glint, something metallic in one of our buddies' bags. It was a weapon, a handgun. The atmosphere changed in an instant. It was like a chilling silence descended upon us. We were a group of friends out in the wilderness, and now one among us had a weapon. Questions buzzed in our minds. Why did he bring it? Was there something we didn't know? No one wanted to confront him directly. We were all on edge. The idea of a gun in the midst of a camping trip, it didn't sit right. We tried to keep things normal, but the unease lingered. As night fell, paranoia gripped us. Every movement seemed amplified, every rustle in the bushes felt ominous. We couldn't relax, not knowing why that weapon was there. Sleep was out of the question. We stayed alert, wary, eyeing that bag with the weapon. It felt like a ticking time bomb, ready to shatter our sense of security. The next morning, we attempted to address it, but no one wanted to be confrontational. It was like walking on eggshells. Nobody wanted to agitate a situation that was already tense. We huddled, discussing what to do, trying to decipher why he had it. Was it for protection, or was there something more sinister at play? The uncertainty gnawed at us. Throughout the day, our unease grew. We'd been friends for years, but that weapon had created a gaping rift of suspicion among us. It was hard to feel safe, hard to trust. Night crept in again, and with it, the anxiety surged. We sat around the fire, conversation stilted, the tension palpable. It felt like a battle between our camaraderie and the fear that had seeped into our group. As the hours passed, the weapon stayed in that bag, a menacing presence that no one dared touch. We were all wondering what was the purpose of it. Was he planning something? Each noise in the dark sent shivers down our spines. I could sense the fear in everyone's eyes, the silent plea for this nightmare to end. It was a night of watching, waiting, hoping that nothing would happen. But the fear had taken root, and the sense of impending danger loomed large. Morning broke, and relief washed over us. The tension eased a bit, but the unease lingered. We packed up in silence, avoiding eye contact, each lost in our own thoughts. The drive back was silent, the weight of the unspoken still heavy among us. We'd escaped a potential disaster, but the trust among friends had been fractured. I was thrilled about this camping trip to Big Bend National Park, excited to explore the rugged beauty of Texas wilderness. My gear was packed, and I was ready for an adventure. The park's vastness was mesmerizing, a canvas of stark beauty with its rugged canyons and vast desert. I set up camp, reveling in the silence of the desolate landscape. But that silence felt unsettling at times, an eerie feeling that I couldn't shake off. One afternoon, I spotted a figure in the distance, a lone man wandering through the desert. I didn't think much of it at first. People exploring the park were common. But as the days went by, I kept seeing him, always at a distance, watching. It was unnerving. I felt his eyes on me, his presence becoming a constant undercurrent of my days in the park. He never approached, never said a word, just watched from afar. I tried to brush it off, chalking it up to coincidence, but his persistent observation started to crawl under my skin. It felt like an invasion of privacy, like I was being hunted by his gaze. One evening, as I sat by the fire, I glimpsed him again, much closer this time, hidden in the twilight shadows. My heart skipped a beat. What did he want? Why was he always lurking? The next morning, I decided to confront him, to ask what was going on. I found him sitting by a stream, his back to me, gazing into the water. I hesitated for a moment, but then cleared my throat, calling out to him. He turned slowly, and a chill ran down my spine. There was something unsettling in his eyes, something vacant yet intense. He didn't respond, just stared at me in silence. I tried to keep calm, asking if he needed help or if he was lost. But he remained silent, and the tension in the air thickened. It felt wrong, dangerous, and a cold fear settled in my stomach. I made a swift retreat, feeling his eyes follow me even as I hurried back to my camp. That night, I barely slept, the unease growing with every passing hour. The following day, I saw him again, closer to my campsite, as if he was encroaching. Panic coursed through me. What did he want from me? Why was he getting closer? I packed my essentials quickly, my heart pounding, ready to leave. But as I turned to go, he was there, right behind me, his presence suffocating. I stumbled back, my words caught in my throat. He just stood there, an unnerving grin spreading across his face. It was a sinister smile, devoid of warmth or humanity. I felt trapped, cornered, my instincts screaming danger. I managed to break free, running as fast as I could, the adrenaline pumping through my veins. The fear was overwhelming, my breaths ragged, and every sound amplified in my ears. I didn't stop until I reached the park's entrance, my heart pounding against my chest. I never looked back, too afraid to see if he was still following. It was a nightmarish experience, one that haunted me for days. I didn't know his intentions, but I was certain they were far from benign. That stranger in the desolate landscape of Big Bend National Park had instilled a fear in me that lingered long after I'd left.